Morning, church. I want to share with you from the book of Nehemiah, which is where we're at this week in our Bible reading plan. Yesterday we were in chapter 2, and Nehemiah follows on from the book of Ezra. Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem just a bit after Ezra. Ezra was very much a person who came and spoke the law, taught the word of God to the people. But Nehemiah very much came back as practical hands to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. In chapter 1 he'd heard about the state of the wall and the state of the city, how it was fallen down and in ruins, and this really moved him, and he got really upset, and obviously started thinking about ways he could get involved and help. Then in chapter 2 we read of this scene where he goes to the king. Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king, so he was a servant in the king's court. He was the one who would bring the king his drinks, taste them, just to check they are poisoned and they're safe to drink, and then give them to the king. So his job was very lowly. It was also risky. Servants weren't seen as much in terms of value. And he goes to the king, and in chapter 2 it says this: I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Then I was very much afraid. So Nehemiah has gone to the king, usual job, take the wine, and he's sad. And he shouldn't have been sad. It wasn't his job to be sad or let emotions come out in the presence of the king, and he's got a right to be afraid because the king's noticed. He could get in serious trouble for this. But Nehemiah just lets it out, and he says, I've got a good reason to be sad. He says, Why should not my face be sad, when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruin and its gates have been destroyed by the fire? The king goes on to say, well, what are you asking? And Nehemiah boldly says, I want to go back and I want to build the walls of my home city. It's a pretty amazing, remarkable scene in the fact that Nehemiah goes to the king sad, in the fact that the king asks the well-being of a servant, which seems strange, and then in the fact that Nehemiah has the boldness to just lay out what's on his heart and say, I want to go back and build this wall. Nehemiah is an amazing book in terms of looking at what it is to have vision from God, to be a visionary, what it is to act on that vision, what it is to be a leader and lead people. But right at the beginning we see that he was a guy who was firstly moved by the needs around him, and a guy who was willing to let that show, and willing and bold to ask the questions, and be willing and bold to go and do something about it. And just a wonderful example to us when it comes to doing the work of God and being moved by people and things around us, and being bold to step out into something that would be completely maybe not our thing. Think about that. Nehemiah was a servant. His job, his life entailed testing wine and giving it to the king. That was his job. It was pretty lowly, but he kind of had this vision to go back and become this big building contractor, to build a wall of a city. It's a huge leap in terms of his current skill set and current experience to make such a grand kind of plan to go and build a city. But he did it, and we'll read on that yes, he came up against opposition, but he went on and he did it, and he built the wall. And it just goes to show, that God can do great things if we're moved firstly, and then if we have the boldness and the faith to go out and do it. Luke encourages last year about a new year and what it is to walk in faith, and sometimes those are seemingly little things to other people, but that each decision we make and each step should be born out of faith and trusting God. And maybe this year there are things that are on your heart, or will soon be on your heart, and they require steps of faith. Maybe things that other people might not see you doing, or you yourself might not see you doing. But like Nehemiah, he's a real example of what God can do with someone who's moved and has the faith to step out and do something. Hope that's encouraging, and hope you have a good day. God bless.